Hi everyone, welcome back to the shop. Today we are working primarily on the bandsaw. It's one of my very favorite tools, and I wanted to add a little bit more utility to it. You can see I've gotten started with putting some rails on here, and these are going to help with a fence mechanism. Essentially, it's the similar principle to a table saw fence or any other fence that will allow a kind of flat reference surface to be perpendicular to the table, so that for something like resawing, which is sawing a narrow board into two narrower boards, or similar things like that, I have a reference face against it, and it makes everything better. So let's go ahead and get to it. It's going to be a pretty simple construction, so hopefully I can knock it out today. Yeah! So they are still moving a little bit. I was worried that there just wouldn't be enough friction between these two blocks of wood to act as clamps. But I'm going to put some handles on this so I can get better torque when I'm trying to twist these, because right now I'm just trying to do that, which is not obviously really helping me. So let me see that, and if that fixes the problem, great, and if not, I have some other plans too. tried that, couldn't quite get the grip I needed because this nut kept moving, so I'm just going to double lock them in place, which I hope will be enough. I'm trying to avoid using epoxy on this just because it's not great against that sort of rotational torque anyway. So the problem I'm running into now is because I'm a little bit stupid. These thread left to tighten because of the way I have the T-nut on there. Which would be fine, except whenever it gets a little bit frictious, the wood is loosening this lock nut at the end here. Now I could conceivably put another nut on here and do the same kind of idea that I have at the bottom, except then I'm really running low on adjustable space, which isn't ideal. If I fiddle with it and get it tight, I got that side on pretty well. And this side I can't quite get to the same level, just because this is slipping too much. So I gotta think of something else now. Alright, so I went around and tightened up all the nuts to the best of my ability. And now, yeah, it moves when I put pretty much all my body weight on it. And I can live with that, honestly. Because if that much weight is going on the fence, then I'm doing something wrong anyway. And we'll see if that ends up causing problems later, but this is just a first draft, so that'll work for me for now. Now the one thing I do want to do that I have not done yet is just to add a strip. I think I'll put it on the back side here just to help hold everything square against this rail here. And that way I don't have to worry about going nuts squaring it up every time I use it. Actually no, I'd rather have it on the front because that's what matters more. Yeah, but same idea either way. So let me get that attached and then I'll give this thing a proper test run. I went ahead and added that front rail, or front guide, or whatever you want to call it. I also, you may have noticed before, I didn't have these grooves here. It's because I completely forgot, but it was pretty easy with a chisel and handsaw. They're not pretty, but nothing about this project is supposed to be. And the handles I just roughly rounded on the bandsaw. Because I figured this is a bandsaw project, might as well make it bandsaw centric. Just checking the square on my rail thingamajig here. Seems pretty good. Now here is a problem that I had not thought about at all, is when I get too close to the blade, I bump up against the guide apparatus. So I'm gonna have to cut out some sort of notch in the top here. But before I do that, let me see if I can get an idea of... Still can't quite get these top nuts tight enough. It seems like when I get them actually keyed in, they're fine. Maybe I'm just not quite locking them all the way. And I am putting a considerable amount of torque on them, and nuts aren't really designed for this, so I get it. Alright, now I am putting as much of my weight as I can. I'm on 1 foot, and that's not going anywhere. So I think I can call that a success. And it's an unqualified success because I'm the one doing it. So the last little adjustment I need to make now, I believe, is just to make a cutout so that if I need to, I can work past the guide system here. Now, I have to figure out how deep I want to go, because obviously this can go all the way down to pretty much to the table. I don't want to go too deep, A, because if I'm resawing something, it's going to most likely be at least a few inches tall, and B, I don't want to take away from the stability of the fence itself. So I think I will lower this just around here. So I think, what is that? That's 4 inches. I'm extremely unlikely to be doing anything lower than 3 inches. And if the guide's at 4 inches, if I'm doing something 3 inches, I can live with that, especially with the fence. So I'm just going to make a rough mark where to do that. And then, yeah, I'll have to figure out if I can cut it on the bandsaw or if I'll need to be clever about it. An artistic prodigy, I am not, but I get the idea. Well, that works pretty nicely. I'm just gonna sand down these edges just so they don't catch anything. And I will say, I looked at a lot of commercially available resaw fences before deciding to build and designing this one. And I don't think any of them really allow for the blade guide to go that low, so you gotta, consider if you're making something that it's only 3 inches tall, you still want the blade guides to be close to that. If you have a fence, it probably doesn't matter as much, but I don't see that this hurts me in any way, and it actually helps a lot as I'm doing stuff. And the rails extend all the way back, and the idea is this way, if I don't need the fence, for the majority of things that I cut, I can just leave it to the side, and it won't really get in my way too much. Obviously, there's going to be a couple things, especially if I ever need to do, curvy whatevers. But in that case, I'm definitely not going to be using the same blade for resawing as I'm going to be doing for something like a bandsaw box. So the fence is not even a factor at that point. And yeah, that can go pretty much right up to the blade. It is close enough to dead square to where it makes no difference. I don't see any daylight between the teeth of the blade that skew left and the fence. The one thing I'll have to be careful about is if I'm doing any thin cuts to make sure that if the blade deflects, it's not going to chew up the MDF here. Don't think it's going to matter too much because I'm unlikely to be making cuts like that, but I have the option. If I were to do this again, I think the face being MDF is fine. I would build the base and the little support triangle things out of something different. MDF just doesn't do all that well with hardware unless you are extraordinarily careful, which I am not. I've got a couple nail shot out, and you can see it's even cracking a little bit here, so I may even partially rebuild this one, at least to get these support triangles in. Now I don't think they're going anywhere. They're glued and bradded in place, and they're, you know, not holding that much load over the distribution of them. So I don't think it's going to matter too much. The one other thing I did, and I didn't do this on camera because it's very boring, was I went through and I very carefully tuned up the bandsaw, made sure the blade was on there right. I've been having the blade in the wrong position for too long. The wheels were sort of out of whack with each other, and so I took the table off. I really took my time, went through, did all the guides one by one. I used, I believe his name is Alex Snodgrass as my source. He's got a million YouTube videos. And if you have a bandsaw, he's worth looking at, because I was using mine wrong, and it was probably hurting the quality of my work. Definitely hurting the quality of my work. But enough blathering. I'm assuming you all want to see me resaw something. So let's get something to resaw. Alright, let's try to start this nice and simple. This is just a random 2x4. Actually, I cut off part of this 2x4 to make the handles. I'm not going to cut all the way through this. Actually, you know what? I'm just going to chop this into a smaller piece, because I don't want to waste all of it. Now, I know pine shouldn't be any trouble, but we're going to give it a shot. So let's lock everything down here. Put that over this hole a little bit. Yeah, the one tricky thing to remember is the way I have this assembled. Left turns actually tighten the clamps. But given that it's pretty much just me using this, I don't think it matters too much, because I am capable of remembering that, or at least figuring out when I'm wrong. I do think adding this rail on the front to help hold things square is a big help. Just means I have to do that much less alignment every time, which obviously is a good time saver. Oh, one other thing I forgot to mention, I have these T-nuts, these threaded inserts in to thread the threaded rod through. I just put in a panhead screw here just to help hold them in place, because they do kind of threaten to tear out of the MDF. I don't think that's going to be a super long-term solution. Eventually I'm probably going to have to put some sort of block or something in here. That's actually another point against MDF. The T-nuts don't do a great job in it. But it's mostly a stationary hold that they have to deal with, so I'm going to trust that it'll be okay. And then real quick, an easy way to reference that my piece is square here is that I know this back edge of the table is square, and I have it lined up perfectly with it, and that is perfect all the way across. So, at the very least, the back edge of the fence is square. But I know I cut this in parallel because I used the same fence on the table saw. So even if it is a slight parallelogram, these two sides are parallel, which means that this side, which is flat against the bottom side, is square to the back of the fence. Hopefully. It is on there quite well. Feels square against the rail. All right. Let's give this a shot. You have to be really careful finishing these cuts, which is why I used a sacrificial stick here. Because that was what happened when that tension released on the blade. It went about, was it half an inch? Well, probably more than that, into, admittedly this is a very soft pine, but still. The resaw itself, let's see here. That is pretty as a picture. It's smooth, it is flat, it looks square on the edge. No complaints. Now let's try something a little bit tougher than 2x4. For those of you who watch my videos religiously, you'll recognize this as a piece of mahogany, originally from my front porch. I've been using this in a lot of stuff just because it's good to work with. It's hard as heck, and it looks nice. So I need to adjust this again. So that was definitely harder on the saw. And also I was pushing a little hard at the beginning, which was why I was a little higher pitched there. But look at that. That is pretty darn even across the whole thing. It warped a little bit as it came up, which is why you're seeing that. And I think there was at one point where it came off the fence just slightly at the top, which is why it's got a little bit of a wedge thing going on here, but not on the front end. But that was operator error, not the fault of the fence at all. On the one end, and then that fits pretty much exactly on the other end. Obviously, we're ignoring this little bit where I screwed up. And on the top and bottom of the same side, fits exactly the same. So I'll call that a successful bandsaw fence. Obviously, it still has some issues. I'm going to have to figure out a better way to make sure I keep these handles in place. Eventually, I think what I'll most likely end up doing is remake these handles and put a pin through whatever and use a sterner wood. But for the time being, this should do just fine. So if you haven't subscribed yet, make sure you do. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, compliments, feel free to leave those in the comments for me. Any suggestions for things you'd like to see me build in the future, I'm always looking out for more inspiration and more ideas. If there's nothing else, come join me next time and we'll make some more stuff. Have a good one.